We're starting chapter 9, radicals and rational exponents. I don't think this is on your notes packet. This is just some extra. The nth root of a number. You all know that the square root of 25 is 5, right? Do you know why? 25 is the same as 5 squared, and a square root and a square cancel each other out. The cube root of 64. We need to figure out what 64 is. 64 is what number cubed? Now 8 squared is 64. Try 4. 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 4 is 64. So 64 is 4 cubed, and the cube root of 4 cubed is 4. So that is kind of the direction that we're going with these radicals. It kind of tells you. Ta-da! Okay, so here's the property. This is the first slide that you have in your notes. The nth root of a raised to the n is a. So, for example, the fifth root of 7 to the fifth is 7, because the fifth root and the exponent of 5 cancel each other out. If n is odd, if you have the nth root of a to the n, and that's an odd number, like the third root of -5 to the third, then your answer is going to be whatever is inside those parentheses. If that would have been a +5, then our answer would have been +5. However, if n is even, we have to do the absolute value of that number. So the absolute value of -5 is +5. And that's because if you take -5 on the inside and square it, -5 times -5 is +25, and the square root of +25 is 5. So if that n is an even number, then you look at the absolute value of the radicand, the number underneath the radical. No, don't make it bigger. Just go to the next slide, please. There we go. Do you have this one? Yes, you do. Okay, the property is, if you have a raised to the 1 over n, that becomes the nth root of a. 1/2 is kind of weird. 1/2 is the same as a square root. So an exponent of 1/2 is the same as the square root of 9. But if we had something like x to the 1/5, that would become the 5th root of x. So whatever number is in the denominator, whatever number is on the bottom of that fraction, that number becomes the index. The number in the checkmarky part is called the index. We should probably write that in here. So this number is called the index. So the bottom part of the fraction exponent becomes the index. And in number 2, the bottom part is going to become the index. The numerator of that fraction is going to become the exponent. So a raised to the m over n becomes the nth root of a to the mth. That's kind of confusing. So let's look at 8 to the 2/3. The bottom number 3 goes in the checkmarky part, the index. If I hear you calling it a checkmarky part, I might have to hurt you. So it's an index. It's the checkmarky part. Yeah, that's on the recording. I don't actually hurt my students. Just, I use my ninja skills to like get into their brain and smack their brain a little bit. Perfectly harmless. And the 8 goes underneath the radical, and then the 2 would become the exponent. It can be written like that, the third root of 8 squared. Or we can write it with parentheses, the third root of 8 in parentheses raised to the second. So there's 2 different ways that you can write that. It's probably easier to write it the top way because you just don't have to write as much. Let's take a moment to fill out this chart. So it's got radical form on the left, rational exponent form on the right. Rational exponent means fraction exponents. So, square root of 5. Square root is the one that's kind of weird. If you don't see an index, it means that there's an index of 2. we commonly use the square root without specifying what that index is. So square root means that it's an index of 2. So this would be 5 raised to the 1/2. The second line, notice on the bottom of that fraction, it's a 2. That means it's a square root. If you want to write the 2 in the index, you can, but you don't have to. The x goes under the radical, and the 5 becomes the exponent. I would like you to try the next 3 on your own. If you're watching the video, pause the video and try the next 3 on your own. You're not pausing it. You need to pause it. Okay, so third root of m to the 7th. The 7, that's the exponent. That goes on the top of the fraction. The index of 3 is going to go on the bottom of the fraction. So m raised to the 7/3. 72 to the 3/4. The top number is the exponent. The bottom number is the index. When you're writing an index, I find it easiest to write a small number and then draw the radical around it. Otherwise, if you try to draw the radical and then stick the number in, it can be a little tricky to have enough room. You definitely want to make sure that that number is tucked into the index. If you write 4 and then the square root, that looks like 4 times the square root. To make it a 4th root, that 4 needs to be tucked into that index, into the, for lack of a better term, checkmarky part. And on the bottom, the 4th root of y becomes y to the 1/4. If you're watching the video, you can't really see all of this, but this slide is just a reminder about your exponent rules. You might want to write in the middle of this or somewhere on this page the word PEMDAS with 2 letters per line. You all are familiar with the term PEMDAS, right? Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, order of operations. If you write PEMDAS with 2 letters per line, it helps you to remember the properties of exponents. If you see parentheses, you multiply the exponents. That's like number 4 and kind of a combination of 3 and 5. If you see parentheses, you're going to multiply those exponents together. If you see multiplication, you are going to add the exponents together. That's like this rule number 1. A to the r times a to the s is a to the r plus s. If you see division, you are going to subtract your exponents. That's like rule number 2. Division with the same base, you subtract the exponents. The other rule that's a little bit different is the 0 rule and the negative rule. Anything raised to the 0 power is 1, and negative exponents move. So if you have a negative exponent, that whole term is going to move to the bottom part of the fraction with a 1 on the top. After this, the only difficult thing is that we're dealing with fractions. So I want you to have your calculator out, and I want you to do all of the fraction operations in your calculator. Hopefully you know how to do fractions in your calculator. If you don't, I will attempt to teach you. If you need help with how to do fractions in your calculator, bring your calculator to me and say, I need help doing fractions on this calculator, and I will help you. If you're using one of my calculators, I can help you the most with it. Okay, y times the 4th root of y squared. We are going to use rational exponents to help us rewrite and simplify. The first y is a y to the 1st. And then we have the 4th root of y squared. We've already got practice with that. The 2 is the exponent. The 4 is the index, so it's 2 over 4. Y to the 2 over 4. This is multiplication. When we see multiplication, we are going to add the exponents. So we do y to the 1 plus 2/4. If you wanted to add these by hand, you absolutely could. You could change 1 into 4/4 and then do 4/4 plus 2/4 to get 6/4, which is 3/2, right? Or you can type this into your calculator. 1 plus 2/4 and then equals. The tricky thing is figuring out how to get your answer as an improper fraction, because old scientific calculators don't like improper fractions, but we do like improper fractions. So if I was using one of the graphing calculators, I would type in 1 plus 2 divided by 4, and then I'd push the math button, enter, enter. The first option in the math button is change to fraction, and the graphing calculator works entirely in improper fractions. It's not going to try to give you mixed numbers. So if you do 1 plus 2 divided by 4, math button, option number 1, enter, it will give you your answer as a simplified fraction 3/2. So y to the 3/2 is our answer. If you have a scientific calculator, you would do 1 plus 2 ABC button 4, enter. Your answer looks like a mixed number, and you don't want a mixed number, so you would push second and then your ABC button again, and that will change it from a mixed number back to an improper fraction. If you are struggling with how to do fractions on your calculator, please bring me your calculator and I will help you with that. Okay, B, first thing we need to do is rewrite this using rational exponents. So 4th root of t is t to the 1/4. On the bottom, what index does this radical have on the bottom? A 2. So this is t to the 5/2. When we have division, we subtract the exponents. So 1/4 minus 5/2. Take a moment and try to do 1/4 minus 5/2 in your calculator and then change it back into an improper fraction. On the graphing calculator, I wrote down my keystrokes. You would do 1 divided by 4 minus 5 divided by 2. Math button, enter, enter. And it would tell us that that fraction is negative 9/4. We cannot leave our answer with negative exponents. Negative exponents move. So this whole term is going to move to the bottom and become t to the 9/4 on the bottom. You can't leave your numerator empty, so there'd be a 1 on the top of that numerator. 1 over t to the 9/4. Do you want to try C on your own? I think you can. Pause the video. Start by rewriting each of these terms, and then multiplication means that you would add the exponents. So rewrite them, add your exponents, see what you get. Okay, the first one should be y to the 3/5. The second one should be y to the 2/3. Because it's multiplication, we're going to add those exponents. So 3/5 plus 2/3. Keep in mind when you're adding fractions, you can't just add the tops, add the bottoms. When adding fractions, you have to have a common denominator. So if you wanted to add these by hand, you'd have to look at 5 and 3 and get a common denominator of 15, or we can just plug this into our calculator. So on my calculator, I would type in 3 divided by 5 plus 2 divided by 3. Math button, enter, enter. That tells the calculator I want my answer to be written as a fraction. And it told me the fraction 19/15. If you got that and thought, oh my gosh, that's way too huge, that can't be right, it totally is right. On a scientific calculator, you would do 3 ABC button 5 plus 2 ABC button 3, enter. It's probably going to give you a mixed number, so you'd have to push second and then your ABC button again to change it back into an improper fraction. Okay, we are going to skip domain for right now. And on your assignments, we are going to do, I think number 70 is the last problem.